You're walking through the store or shopping online, right? And you're looking for a swim bait jig head that fits best for the style of fishing that you want to do when throwing single swim baits. And if you're confused on which ones to buy, when and where, this is the video for you. As somebody who is a full-time fishing guide, I rely heavily on throwing the single swim bait technique. It catches hundreds of smallmouth for myself and my clients on a yearly basis on Lake Erie out of Buffalo, New York. So today we're going to dive into why and where and when you should choose a 90-degree or a 60-degree jig head. There are 30-degree ones as well. That's not something that I use a ton with smallmouth fishing. There is a time and place for it. So we're just going to talk about when to throw a 90-degree jig head and when to throw the 60. One thing that you should know as we go through this video on which jig head style to use, when, where, and why, is that everything that I talk about in this video is going to be listed down below in the description. You can click on those links, head on over to Omnia Fishing, and if you type in code SERIOUS10 at checkout, you're going to save yourself 10%. And also, don't be afraid to check out Omnia Premium Pro. You get 10% back on every order, and the $50 that it charges to sign up, you're going to pay for it back almost immediately. And there's all kinds of sweet perks and discounts on other baits, reels, etc. that you get as being a pro member. So hit those descriptions, head over to Omnia, save yourself some money, pick up some awesome baits, and look into Premium Pro if you're curious about saving money on your favorite tackle purchases. Okay, so first, let's start with the 60-degree line tie. When would I choose it and why? There are a couple deciding factors as to when I would want to choose the 60-degree line tie over a 90. So what I'm looking for on my electronics are going to be suspended bass or bass that are actually feeding up, which means that there is bait fish in the water column or bluegill, etc. Whatever the bass is feeding on, that's what ultimately dictates when I'm going to choose a 60-degree head. Also, another time that I would want to choose it is when you're faced with heavy current or you're fishing like a wind-blown point and you're trying to cover water. Sizes for the 60-degree line tie, and I'm going to list all of my favorite ones down below. There's quite a few. Strike King Squadron head, the Matt Allen Dirty Jigs jig head is another really good one. So 60-degree line tie, what's going to happen is when you tie your knot to your line tie here, that's going to create a direct feed, and it's going to give you like a 45-degree angle to your bait or a 60-degree angle to your bait. So what that's going to do with your paddle tails, that's going to cause lift. So your swim bait's going to ride higher in the water column. And that's important when you're targeting bass that are feeding up, or when you're throwing it into schools of bait that are 20 feet below the surface, over 60 feet of water, and you can see on your graph or your forward facing or your 2D that you have arches coming up into the bait fish. So that is when I would reach for a 60-degree angle tie. There are other times too, like if you have suspended grass and you want to hover it over top of that grass, this is going to allow, if it gets hung up slightly, to pull or pop your swim bait out of the tips of that grass and not come back with nearly as much grass on your jig hook. The only downside is if you decide to drag with a 60-degree jig head and slow roll it along the bottom, it's actually going to cause that jig head to kind of pull face down like so. So it's coming through the bottom like this. You're actually going to get hung up a lot more. You're going to lose a lot more baits, jig heads and swim baits, and you're not going to hook up nearly as many fish because your bait is being presented wrong to the bass. So make sure when you're fishing for suspended bass or bass that are feeding up or suspended clouds of bait over a certain part of the water column that you're reaching for that 60-degree line tie. Next, we're going to dive into the 90-degree swim bait head. And this one's a ball head, got a cast prodigy here, and we're going to dive into why it's my favorite. That being said, the main reason why I love throwing a 90-degree ball head is the fact that I can fish it on the bottom or near the bottom. And what that's going to do is when your line tie is coming in at that 45-degree angle as you're retrieving it, This 90-degree head is actually going to allow your bait to run more horizontal in the water. So therefore it's going to look more natural down on the bottom. It's going to crawl. It's going to help keep that bait upright as it ticks the rocks instead of getting way out in front. I love this one on casting out and retrieving it and bouncing it off rocks or ticking rocks, or just every once in a while swimming it just above the bottom and killing it and letting it fall down into the rocks. You want a ball head with a 90-degree tie whenever you're fishing fish in structure, offshore, slow winding close to the bottom. It's gonna give you optimal hookup ratio because it's coming through the most natural way, in my opinion, down low in the water column. So when a fish grabs it, they're gonna get the whole thing. So that's basically the biggest difference between the 90-degree and the 60 and the 30 is the fact that 90-degree near the bottom or on the bottom, 60-degree you're gonna fish up in the water column, and the 30-degree basically is great for like around cover, and it's something that we don't use on the Great Lakes all that often. But if you're serious about throwing more swim baits and catching more bass, I hope you enjoyed this video. All my favorite swim baits, all my favorite heads are going to be linked down below. There's a bunch of them. I fished probably a dozen of them. So, and the ones that I really like I said, will be listed down below. So if you're new here, smash that subscribe button. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for tuning into this video, and we'll catch you all next time. Here's one. Little guy. On the Gypsy Prodigy. Look at that little squeaker. So we made a move. We're just fishing a gap with a lot of current and just slowly swimming this dude down. Now that's interesting right there. I don't know if you can see it, but it's pinned down, which means he came over the top of it, I do believe, or was eating it as it was coming by, and he ate it this way, like this way. So interesting. Let's see if we can get another one.